Vincent Willem van Gogh was born on March 30th, 1853, in the small Dutch village of Groot-Zundert, surrounded by quiet fields and low church bells. His father, Theodorus van Gogh, was a minister. His mother, Anna Cornelia Carbentus, came from a cultured family in The Hague. They named their son after both his grandfather and a brother, stillborn a year before his birth. A strange and silent shadow that would follow him all his life. The Van Gogh household was modest, but respectable. The church provided their home, a maid, a gardener, and a horse-drawn carriage. Anna, proud and disciplined, raised her children to preserve the family's dignity. Vincent was serious and thoughtful, a child of solitude. His mother encouraged him to draw, and though his early sketches were simple, they revealed a mind already searching for meaning in ordinary things. At 11, Vincent was sent away to school. He disliked the separation and wrote home often, asking to return. But in 1866, his parents sent him again, this time to Tilburg, where he studied under Constant Huysmans, an artist who taught that one should paint impressions, not technique. Vincent, lonely and withdrawn, absorbed little. Years later, he described his youth as austere and cold and sterile. At 16, his uncle Sent secured him a position at the art dealers Goupil and Siey in The Hague. It was there that Vincent first entered the world of art professionally. He worked hard, learned fast, and by 1873 was transferred to London, earning more than his father, living at 87 Hackford Road, and for a brief moment feeling content, but peace did not last. He fell quietly in love with his landlady's daughter, Eugénie Loyer. When she rejected him, Vincent's world began to tilt inward. His cheerfulness faded, replaced by a deep religious fervor. His family moved him to Paris, hoping new surroundings might help. But there he grew disillusioned with the art business itself, the selling, the commerce. By 1876, he was dismissed. He wandered, first to England, where he taught in small schools and worked as a minister's assistant, then home again, restless, turning toward faith. He read scripture in 3 languages and lived like a monk. He fasted, prayed, and sought purpose in the faces of the poor. In 1879, he found it, or thought he did. He became a missionary in the coal mining region of Boring, Belgium. There, he gave away his possessions, slept on straw, and shared bread with the miners. The church saw this as excessive, even undignified, and dismissed him. Homeless, he walked 75 kilometers to Brussels. He was tired, poor, and unsure of his path. But he carried a sketchbook. He drew the miners, their homes, their hardship, and somewhere in that bleak landscape, a new purpose began to form. By 1880, encouraged by his brother Theo, Vincent decided to become an artist. He traveled to Brussels, where he studied anatomy and perspective at the Académie Royale des Beaux-Arts. He was 27, poor and uncertain. But for the first time, he had found something that could turn his loneliness into light. In the spring of 1881, Vincent van Gogh returned to his parents' home in Etten. The fields were quiet, and he spent long hours drawing the people of the village, neighbors, workers, anyone who would sit for him. That summer, his cousin Cornelia Key Voss Stricker came to visit. She was recently widowed, 7 years older, with a young son. Vincent admired her deeply. He walked with her often and soon confessed his love, asking her to marry him. Key refused him kindly but firmly, saying, "No, nay, never." The rejection wounded him. When she returned to Amsterdam, Vincent followed, still hoping she would change her mind. Her parents disapproved. Her father found his persistence improper. In despair, Vincent once held his hand over the flame of a lamp, saying, "Let me see her for as long as I can keep my hand in the fire." His uncle stopped him before he was badly hurt. Unable to win her affection, he turned back to art. In The Hague, he sought the guidance of his cousin, the painter Anton Mauve. Mauve was kind and practical, advising him to study charcoal and pastel before attempting oil paint. Vincent followed his advice diligently. By the winter, however, he had again quarreled with his family, refusing to attend church, and left home once more. In early 1882, Mauve introduced him to oil painting. Vincent quickly fell in love with the medium. He described spreading thick layers of paint, scraping and reshaping the surface until it felt alive. "I am surprised," he wrote to Theo, "at how good the results are." Yet his relationship with Mauve soon cooled. The cause, perhaps, was Vincent's choice of models. Too poor to hire professionals, he brought in laborers and street people, anyone willing to sit. Mauve disapproved. Their friendship faded. That winter, Vincent met Klasina Maria Sien-Hornick, a struggling woman with a small daughter and another child on the way. She was weary, poor, and grateful for his kindness. Vincent took her in, cared for her through her pregnancy, and for a time, they lived together as a family. He sketched her constantly, a woman of hardship and dignity, her quiet presence filling his small studio. When his father learned of this, he was furious, demanding that Vincent leave her. Vincent resisted, but eventually, in 1883, walked away. Poverty and pressure had worn him down, and he believed family life could no longer coexist with his art. Sien later drifted back into hardship and despair. Years after Vincent's death, she took her own life in the River Scheldt. In the autumn of 1883, Vincent left The Hague for Drenthe, a lonely region in the north. He painted its flat fields and gray skies, vast, empty places that mirrored his own solitude. By December, the cold and isolation grew unbearable. He returned once more to his parents, now living in Nuenen. The wandering artist was home again, restless, uncertain, and still searching for something he could not yet name. When Vincent van Gogh settled in Nuenen, he found himself surrounded by quiet fields, low cottages, and the slow rhythm of rural life. The village became his studio. Day after day, he painted weavers at their looms, farmers in their fields, and small, dimly lit rooms where families gathered at dusk. He worked quickly and outdoors, finishing sketches before the light changed. Among his earliest works from this time was the parsonage garden at Nuenen, a view of his father's garden, somber and peaceful. Many years later, long after Vincent's death, the painting would be stolen from a museum, as if history itself could not resist keeping a piece of him. In 1884, Vincent befriended Margot Begeman, the daughter of a neighbor. She was 10 years older, gentle, and lonely. They often walked together, and soon she fell in love with him. Vincent cared for her, though less deeply. When they spoke of marriage, their families objected, and in despair, Margot swallowed poison. Vincent rushed her to a hospital, saving her life. The event haunted him quietly for years. The following spring, tragedy returned. On 26 March 1885, his father died suddenly of a heart attack. Vincent mourned him in silence, turning back to his canvases for solace. In Nuenen, he painted nearly 200 works, still lifes, cottages, portraits of peasants, all in deep earth tones. Browns, grays, and ochres filled his world then, before the bright colors of Paris and Provence would change him. His hands moved fast, rough and heavy, yet filled with compassion for the working poor he saw every day. That same year, his brother Theo wrote from Paris, asking if he had any paintings to show. Vincent sent The Potato Eaters, his first great work. 5 peasants gathered around a dimly lit table, their hands rough from labor, their faces worn and honest. He believed it was the truest thing he had ever painted, but Paris wanted brightness. Theo replied that the paintings were too dark, too heavy, not in the spirit of the new Impressionist light. Still, in August, Vincent's work appeared for the first time in public, small canvases displayed in a shop window in The Hague. It was a quiet beginning. Later that year, scandal struck the village. A young woman who had modeled for him became pregnant, and rumors spread. The local priest forbade his parishioners to sit for the artist. Doors that had once opened to him now stayed closed, and so, by the end of 1885, Vincent was again alone, misunderstood, restless, and ready to leave Nuenen behind. The colors of his art were still dark, but a brighter world was waiting just ahead. In November 1885, Vincent van Gogh left Nuenen and moved to Antwerp. The city was larger, noisier, and full of new color. He rented a small room above a paint dealer's shop on the Rue des Images, a fitting address for a man who lived through pictures. He lived simply, often too simply. The money Theo sent was spent on paints and models, not on food. Most days he survived on coffee, bread, and tobacco. He wrote to his brother that since the previous May, he could remember only 6 hot meals. His teeth loosened, his body thinned, but still he painted. In Antwerp, Vincent studied color. After years of dark, heavy tones, he began to experiment: reds, cobalt blues, emerald greens. He spent hours in the museums studying the work of Rubens, fascinated by the painter's warmth and movement. He also discovered Japanese woodblock prints in the harbor markets. Their clean lines, bold shapes, and bright spaces spoke to him. He began collecting them, later filling the walls of his Paris rooms with their quiet harmony. But his health faltered. He was drinking heavily again, and by February 1886, he was hospitalized. Thin, exhausted, possibly ill with more than one affliction. When he recovered, he enrolled at the Academy of Fine Arts in Antwerp, hoping formal study might sharpen his skills. It did not go smoothly. Vincent's work was raw and emotional, out of step with the Academy's traditions. He clashed with his teachers, who prized precision and contour, while Vincent sought life and movement. One day, asked to draw the Venus de Milo, he instead sketched a Flemish peasant woman, broad, strong, and real. When his instructor tried to correct the drawing, Vincent snapped. "A woman must have hips," he shouted, "a pelvis to carry a child." The argument was loud enough to echo through the halls. He stopped attending classes soon after. A few weeks later, in March 1886, the Academy decided that several students, including Vincent, would have to repeat the year. He did not stay long enough to hear the news. Tired, restless, and still searching for belonging, Vincent packed his paints once more. Paris awaited, a city of light, color, and new beginnings. When Vincent arrived in Paris in March 1886, he moved in with his brother Theo in a small apartment in Montmartre. The city was alive with artists and light, and its energy seemed to hum beneath the cobblestones. Vincent enrolled briefly at Fernand Cormon's studio, learning beside other young painters who would one day change art itself. That summer, the brothers moved to a larger flat on Rue Le Pic. Vincent filled the rooms with canvases, portraits of friends, still lifes, scenes of Montmartre, bridges over the Seine. He was surrounded by color. In Antwerp, he had discovered Japanese prints. Now, in Paris, he collected hundreds of them, hanging them on his walls like windows into another world. Their bold shapes and flat spaces began to influence his style, a touch of Japan in the streets of France, Paris changed him. After seeing the work of Adolphe Monticelli, Vincent's palette brightened. He began to use cobalt blue, vermilion, and gold. His brushstrokes became quicker, freer, a conversation between impulse and light. He painted seascapes, cafes, and sky-washed gardens. He and Theo even helped publish a book about Monticelli, whose colors he admired deeply. At Cormon's studio, Vincent met Émile Bernard, Louis Anquetin, Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, and John Russell, who painted his portrait. He spent long afternoons at Père Tanguy's paint shop, the only place then displaying Cézanne's work. There, surrounded by bright pigments and talk of pointillism and neo-impressionism, Vincent listened, observed, and slowly absorbed. The brothers argued often. Theo found his company difficult. Vincent found city life overwhelming, yet they forgave easily. By early 1887, Vincent had moved to Asnières, where he painted the bridges and riverside cafes. Under the influence of Paul Signac, he experimented with pointillism, tiny dots of pure color laid side by side to shimmer in harmony. In November, he befriended Paul Gauguin. They exhibited together with Bernard and Anquetin at the Grand Bouillon Restaurant du Chalet. The show drew curious visitors, Pissarro, Seurat, and Signac among them, who debated art deep into the night. Vincent exchanged paintings with Gauguin and spoke with passion about what art could mean to ordinary people. By February 1888, the noise of Paris had worn him down. He had painted more than 200 works in 2 years, each one a small experiment in light, friendship, and faith. On his last day in the city, he visited Seurat's studio, then boarded a train heading south. He was searching for quiet, for sunlight, and for something the city could not give him. He was going to Arles, to paint the world as he dreamed it could be. By February 1888, Van Gogh's health was failing. His coughing grew worse, and drink had worn him thin. He left Paris for the south, seeking warmth, quiet, and light, a place where he might build a community of painters. He arrived in Arles, a small Provençal town that felt, as he wrote to Theo, like a foreign country. The uniforms of Zouave soldiers, the pale stone churches, the cafes filled with absinthe drinkers, all seemed to him strange and vivid. For the first time in years, he felt alive. In the next 15 months, he created more than 200 paintings and over 100 drawings. The colors of Arles transformed him. His canvases glowed with yellow, ultramarine, and violet, fields of wheat, harvests, windmills, and the broad sunlit sky. Among them were the old mill, Harvest in Provence, and a series of local landscapes he sent to friends in Pont-Aven, exchanging work with Gauguin and Émile Bernard. In May 1888, he rented 4 rooms at 2 Place Lamartine, the house he would later paint as the Yellow House. He moved his few belongings from the hotel to the Café de la Gare and began furnishing the rooms slowly, hoping they would become both home and studio. He imagined a gallery of shared art where color and friendship could replace loneliness. To decorate the walls, he painted some of his most loved works: Van Gogh's chair, bedroom in Arles, the night cafe, cafe terrace at night, starry night over the Rhone, and vase with 12 sunflowers. Each canvas seemed to pulse with the warmth he had long been searching for. He wrote that the night cafe expressed the idea that a cafe is a place where one can ruin oneself, go mad, or commit a crime. It was his way of showing that even beneath color and light, human despair still flickered. That summer, he traveled to the fishing village of Sainte-Marie-de-la-Mer, where he taught a young Zouave officer to paint and filled sketchbooks with boats and waves. He made new friends, Eugène Boch, an idealistic Belgian painter, and dreamed again of an artist's fellowship under the southern sun. In Arles, for a time, everything seemed possible. The yellow walls, the open fields, and the heat of the day had become his companions. The world glowed before him, and in its glow, Vincent painted as if racing the light itself. By the late summer of 1888, Vincent van Gogh was filled with hope. Paul Gauguin had agreed to come to Arles. For months, Vincent had dreamed of an artist's colony in the south, a place where painters could live, work, and share ideas under the same bright sky. To prepare, he painted feverishly. In 1 week alone, he created 4 versions of sunflowers, their yellow faces glowing like captured sunlight. In the hope of living in a studio of our own with Gauguin, he wrote to Theo, "I'd like to do a decoration for the studio. Nothing but large sunflowers." He furnished the yellow house slowly, buying 2 beds on the advice of his friend Joseph Roulin, the kindly postal worker whose portrait he painted. On 17th of September, Vincent spent his first night there, surrounded by bare walls, a few chairs, and the scent of fresh paint. He imagined it as the beginning of something larger than himself. When Gauguin finally arrived on 23rd October, Vincent's excitement was immense. At first, the 2 men painted side by side, exchanging ideas and techniques. Gauguin painted Vincent bent over his easel in The Painter of Sunflowers. Vincent, in turn, painted from memory, gardens, portraits, and landscapes that glowed with imagination. Together, they walked the old Roman burial grounds of the Alice camps, where they painted their paired canvases, les Aliscamps. But beneath the color, tension brewed. Gauguin was confident, proud, and often dismissive. Vincent admired him deeply, but longed to be treated as an equal. The 2 clashed often, about art, about money, about everything and nothing. Their friendship, which had begun in light, slowly turned toward shadow. In December, they traveled to Montpellier to see the works of Courbet and Delacroix. The visit did little to calm their tempers. Vincent grew anxious, convinced that Gauguin would soon leave him. "There is excessive tension between us," he wrote. What had begun as a dream of harmony was unraveling, thread by thread. In the yellow house, the walls still shone with sunflowers, symbols of friendship and warmth. Yet within them, the colors began to darken, and the light that once inspired him flickered toward something restless and strange. The winter of 1888 descended on Arles with heavy rain and restless minds. Inside the yellow house, Vincent van Gogh and Paul Gauguin's friendship had soured into something fragile and volatile. Vincent had begun to sense that Gauguin intended to leave, a fear that gnawed at him day and night. Money was tight, tempers were high, and the once bright dream of an artist's colony was fading fast. On the evening of 23rd December, something in Vincent broke. The exact events of that night remain uncertain. Gauguin would later claim that Van Gogh had chased him through the streets with a razor, though the story was never verified. What is known is that after an argument, Vincent returned alone to his room. There, gripped by voices only he could hear, he took the razor and cut off part of his own left ear. He wrapped the piece carefully in paper, walked through the rain-soaked streets, and handed it to a young woman named Gabriel, a cleaning girl at the local brothel. "Keep this object carefully," he is said to have told her. The next morning, a policeman found Vincent unconscious, his head and hands covered in blood. He was taken to the hospital in Arles, where a young doctor, Felix Ray, treated him. The ear was brought to the hospital too, but too much time had passed to reattach it. Vincent awoke days later with no memory of what had happened. The doctors called it acute mania with generalized delirium. When Theo heard the news, he rushed from Paris on Christmas Day to find his brother weak but alive. Vincent was semi-lucid, speaking in fragments, asking for Gauguin, who, terrified, had already fled. He never saw Vincent again. In the weeks that followed, Vincent drifted between recovery and relapse. The townspeople began to whisper. To them, he was Le Fou-Rou, the red-headed madman. In March 1889, after petitions from neighbors, the police closed the Yellow House and sent him back to the hospital. Yet even there, surrounded by white walls and the scent of disinfectant, he continued to paint the courtyard garden, the doctors, the light that streamed through the barred windows. He gave the portrait of Dr. Ray to his physician, who used it, without much thought, to patch a chicken coop. Decades later, the same painting would be valued in the tens of millions. By May, Vincent decided to leave Arles. His mind had become a battlefield, but he still longed for calm. Sometimes moods of indescribable anguish, he wrote. Sometimes moments when the veil of time and fatality seems to be torn apart for an instant. He would soon enter the asylum at Saint-Rémy, carrying with him his paints, his brushes, and the hope that art might yet heal what life had broken. On 8th May 1889, Vincent van Gogh entered the asylum of Saint-Paul-de-Moselle in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. Accompanied by the kind clergyman Frédéric Salle, he arrived seeking peace, or at least a gentler kind of silence. The asylum, once a monastery, stood surrounded by lavender fields and olive groves, serene on the outside, yet filled with the murmurs of restless souls within. It was run by Dr. Théophile Péron, a former naval physician, who granted Van Gogh a small mercy, 2 adjoining cells. One was a bedroom with barred windows, the other a studio. From those windows, Vincent painted what he saw: the gardens, the trees, the light shifting through iron bars. The asylum and its grounds became his new universe. He painted lilacs, the garden of St. Paul Hospital, and the dim hallways and vestibule of the asylum. When he was permitted brief supervised walks, he wandered among cypresses and olive trees, painting them in spirals and flames of color. It was during these long, solitary days that he created the Starry Night, the vision of a swirling sky over a sleeping village, born from both madness and magnificence. His world had narrowed, yet his art expanded. Limited by isolation, he turned inward, painting from memory and reimagining the works of others. He copied the humble figures of Millet's The Sour and Noonday Rest, likening his own copies to a musician interpreting Beethoven, the same notes, but sung through another soul. His brush grew more deliberate, his touch more confident. He painted prisoners round after Gustave Doré, a haunting image of men circling endlessly inside a high-walled yard. One prisoner looks out, perhaps Vincent himself, searching for something beyond confinement. Between February and April 1890, he suffered another severe relapse. Writing became too difficult, but he could still paint. Quiet, reflective pieces like 2 peasant women digging in a snow-covered field at sunset. He asked his family to send him old sketches from his early years, hoping to breathe new life into them. From that nostalgia came Sorrowing Old Man, At Eternity's Gate, a bent figure with his head in his hands, painted not in despair, but in understanding. Still, light would return between the storms. When Theo's son was born, Vincent's heart lifted. "I started right away to make a picture for him," he wrote. "Branches of white almond blossom against a blue sky." The painting was a gift, not just for the child, but for life itself. Inside those quiet, echoing corridors of Saint-Rémy, Vincent found his most profound voice. Even in illness, he painted beauty from the edges of suffering, color where there was pain, and movement where there was stillness. The world outside had shrunk to stone walls and gardens, but within him, the sky kept expanding. By early 1890, recognition had finally begun to touch Vincent van Gogh's life. Faint, fleeting, but real. In January, the art critic Albert Aurier wrote in Mercure de France, calling him a genius. For a man who had sold almost nothing, who had lived with rejection and doubt, those words were a quiet miracle. They reached him in the asylum at Saint-Rémy, a small spark of light during his darkest year. In February, inspired and restless, he painted 5 versions of L'Arlésienne, Madame Gignot, based on a sketch Gauguin had drawn when she sat for both of them in Arles. That same month, Van Gogh was invited to exhibit with Les Dandes, a circle of avant-garde painters in Brussels. At the opening dinner, one member, Henri de Gros, insulted Vincent's work. Instantly, Toulouse-Lautrec leapt to defend him, challenging de Gros to a duel, while Signac declared he'd continue the fight if Lautrec fell. The incident ended with de Gros' apology, but for once, Van Gogh's art had people fighting for it, not against it. In March, his paintings were shown at the Société des Artistes Indépendants exhibition in Paris, where 10 of his works hung alongside those of the Impressionists. Claude Monet himself remarked that Van Gogh's paintings were the best in the entire show. It was a rare moment of recognition, one that came too late to heal the years of neglect, yet enough to remind him that his art had finally reached others. That May, Vincent left the asylum and moved to the quiet village of Auvers-sur-Oise, just outside Paris, under the care of Dr. Paul Gachet, a physician and amateur painter recommended by Camille Pissarro. On meeting him, Vincent wrote to Theo, "He seems to be at least as ill as I am." Auvers was peaceful, rolling wheat fields, cloudy skies, and quiet cottages. In 70 days, Vincent painted about 70 canvases: the church at Auvers, wheat field with crows, Daubigny's garden, thatched cottages by a hill. His brushstrokes were urgent but graceful, his colors brighter than ever, even as his spirit dimmed. He described the endless plains as boundless as the sea, saying that his wheat fields beneath stormy skies spoke for his sadness and solitude. "The canvases," he wrote to Theo, "will tell you what I cannot say in words." By July, the wheat had turned gold, and the wind pressed against the fields like waves against a shore. In that vast, restless landscape, Vincent painted until his final days, each stroke alive with turbulence and beauty, as if he knew he was running out of time. His final summer was a brief, brilliant bloom, a season when the world began to understand him, just as he began to fade away. On Sunday, 27th July 1890, Vincent van Gogh walked into the fields of Auvers-sur-Oise, the same golden plains he had painted with such passion and melancholy, and shot himself in the chest with a revolver. He was 37. No one knows for certain where it happened, perhaps among the wheat that had filled his final canvases, or in a quiet barn nearby. The bullet was deflected by a rib and lodged deep, missing his vital organs, but leaving him gravely wounded. Remarkably, he managed to walk back to the small inn where he lived, the Auberge Ravou. 2 doctors were summoned, among them Dr. Paul Gachet, who had once served as a war surgeon and knew well the sound of fading breath. There was little they could do. Vincent refused to be taken to a hospital. That night, he lay in his attic room as the sun set over the same fields he had painted, attended by Gachet's son and the innkeeper. The next morning, Theo arrived from Paris. He found his brother calm, even cheerful for a brief moment, as if relieved that the struggle was finally over. But as the day went on, infection spread through his body, and his strength ebbed away. Theo stayed by his side, holding his hand. In the early hours of 29 July, Vincent van Gogh died. His last words to his brother were soft and unforgettable. "The sadness will last forever." He was buried the next day, 30 July 1890, in the small cemetery of Auvers-sur-Oise. The coffin was covered with sunflowers, the very flowers that had once symbolized light and friendship. Those who attended included Theo, Paul Gachet, Émile Bernard, Lucien Pissarro, and a handful of villagers who had quietly admired him. Theo, already weakened by illness and heartbroken by grief, did not live long after. He died 6 months later, on 25 January 1891, at just 33 years old. In 1914, Theo's devoted wife, Jo van Gogh Bonger, arranged for his body to be moved so the brothers could rest side by side. Their graves lie together in Auvers, covered with ivy, simple and silent, Vincent on one stone, Theodore on the other. Over the years, scholars have debated the nature of Vincent's illness, epilepsy, bipolar disorder, porphyria, but no diagnosis can fully capture the turbulence and beauty of his mind. What is known is that he lived intensely, painting through hunger, exhaustion, and despair, always chasing a vision only he could see. And though his life ended in solitude, his art, radiant, restless, and alive, continues to speak in the language he left behind: color, light, and longing. Vincent van Gogh's journey as an artist began humbly. Though he had drawn and painted watercolors as a child, his earliest surviving works show a man still searching for form and confidence. When his uncle, an art dealer, commissioned drawings of The Hague in 1882, Vincent's work failed to impress. Yet, he refused to give up. He spent months experimenting with light, shading, and human figures, often sketching peasants in quiet, laborious poses. What his contemporaries dismissed as dull and lifeless would later be recognized as the foundations of his genius. The first signs of an artist who could find poetry in ordinary lives. By 1883, he began painting outdoors, inspired by the working class and the Dutch countryside. His colors were still, dark, filled with earth tones, brown, gray, and green, reflecting both the rural setting and his own introspective nature. During this period, he created The Potato Eaters, a raw, shadowy depiction of peasant life that he considered one of his greatest early achievements. But when he sent it to Paris, his brother Theo found it too dark, too old-fashioned for the emerging age of Impressionism. In Paris, everything changed. The city's light, energy, and art scene opened his eyes to color. He studied Japanese prints, admired the bold simplicity of their design, and began to use brighter, more expressive hues. He learned about complementary colors, blue and orange, red and green, and discovered how they could vibrate against each other on canvas. Color, he wrote, expresses something in itself. To him, yellow became the color of sunlight, warmth, and God, a symbol of hope that glowed through his later works. When he moved south to Arles, this newfound confidence exploded into color. He painted wheat fields, blossoming trees, and rural workers with a sense of wonder that bordered on the spiritual. To Vincent, the act of sowing a seed beneath the blazing sun mirrored the human struggle, life, faith, and creation intertwined. His paintings, like the Sower, were not merely depictions of nature, but visions of divine energy flowing through the world. Even in his most dreamlike works, Starry Night, The Night Cafe, Memory of the Garden at Eton, Van Gogh never fully abandoned reality. He painted what he saw and what he felt, blending the visible world with the emotional one. The swirling heavens of Starry Night were, to him, both movement and meaning, the pulse of the universe rendered in paint. In the last 5 years of his life, Van Gogh painted with fierce intention. He no longer sought to imitate but to reveal, through color, light, and brushstroke, the inner truth of what he saw. He called the works he was proudest of purposeful, and they became the core of his legacy. The Sour, The Night Cafe, Starry Night, and Memory of the Garden at Eton. Each painting was a step closer to what he desired most, not fame, but understanding. To make others see the world as he did, alive with motion, filled with feeling, and radiant with something far greater than himself. Vincent van Gogh's life was a journey told in colors, brushstrokes, and repetition. He often returned to the same subjects, not because he ran out of ideas, but because each new attempt brought him closer to truth. Every move, to Paris, Arles, Saint-Remy, and Auvers, shifted the light, deepened his palette, and reshaped his soul. Portraits fascinated him most. He said that through a portrait, one could reach the infinite. His sitters were ordinary people. The postman, Joseph Roulin, his wife Augustine, the poet Eugène Bock. In each face, Vincent sought emotion over realism. His portraits were not likenesses, but confessions in color. When he lacked models, he painted himself. Over 40 self-portraits show a man in constant reflection, weary, hopeful, intense. The rhythmic brushstrokes of self-portrait with gray felt hat form a luminous halo, while others reveal a fragile face with haunted eyes. He once said he painted himself because he wanted to understand what was happening inside his mind. Flowers were his sunlight. The sunflowers, painted to welcome Gauguin to Arles, radiate warmth and decay at once, a celebration of life that knows it cannot last. He painted them feverishly, working from sunrise before the blooms faded. In the bright yellows of his vases, one can almost feel the heat of southern France. The cypresses and olive trees of Provence spoke to him of life and death. Their twisting, restless forms filled his canvases with motion. He called the cypresses beautiful in line and proportion, like an Egyptian obelisk. In his olive trees, nature becomes almost human, bent, alive, and glowing with unseen energy. The orchards in blossom brought him peace. They were the first things he painted in Arles, rows of flowering trees under blue skies. He worked quickly, capturing spring before it vanished. To him, the orchard symbolized rebirth, a reminder that even after winter, beauty returns. And then came the wheat fields, the endless gold waves beneath heavy skies. They were the heart of his final paintings, the mirror of his spirit. In Wheatfield with Crows, the horizon stretches far, dark birds scatter, and the earth glows with both life and sorrow. He told Theo that these fields spoke what he could not say in words, sadness, solitude, but also a strange serenity. Across portraits, flowers, trees, and fields, Van Gogh painted the rhythm of existence. His work was never meant to please. It was meant to feel. And through that feeling, even in his loneliness, he found connection to everything around him, the people, the light, the wind, and the trembling earth beneath his feet. After Van Gogh's first exhibitions in the late 1880s, his reputation began to grow quietly but steadily. Fellow artists, critics, and collectors started to see in his work a raw fire, something unpolished but unforgettable. In 1887, his paintings hung beside those of Seurat and Signac in Paris. A year later, The critic Albert Aurier described his art as fire, intensity, sunshine. Even the French president was said to have admired his work. After his death, tributes spread across Europe. Exhibitions were held in Brussels, Paris, The Hague, and Antwerp. Writers mourned his loss. Octave Mirbeau wrote that Vincent's death had extinguished a beautiful flame of genius. Theo, his brother and champion, died just months later, leaving behind Theo's young widow, Jo van Gogh Bonger, and a child named after Vincent. Jo became the guardian of his legacy, carefully preserving his letters and paintings when almost no one cared about them. She organized exhibitions, sent paintings to dealers, and made sure people read his letters, the same letters that revealed his brilliance and his pain. Slowly, the myth of Van Gogh began to form, the devoted painter who saw beauty in the ordinary, who suffered for his art, and who died too soon. By the early 1900s, his influence was everywhere. Young painters like Matisse discovered his colors and abandoned their muted tones for vivid reds, blues, and yellows. His retrospective in Paris in 1901 ignited new movements such as Fauvism and Expressionism. In Germany and Austria, artists spoke of him as a prophet of modern art. His words, published in 1914, made readers feel as if they knew him, a man full of love, doubt, and longing for beauty. The legend grew stronger through the decades. The novel Lust for Life and its 1956 film made him a symbol of the misunderstood genius. Francis Bacon painted his own haunting versions of the painter on the road to Tarascon, calling Van Gogh a fellow outsider. In 1971, Don McLean's song Vincent gave the world a melody to match his sadness, Starry, Starry Night. Today, his paintings are among the most valuable ever sold. Portrait of Dr. Gachet, irises, and wheat field with cypresses have fetched sums in the tens of millions. Yet beyond their price, they hold something money can't measure. The soul of a man who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be, alive, trembling, eternal. Even now, more than a century later, Van Gogh's spirit continues to touch the world. His childhood home in North Brabant is now part of Van Gogh National Park, a landscape of fields and skies that once shaped his earliest dreams. It stands as a quiet reminder that genius is not born in comfort. It grows like a sunflower, reaching for the light. And so, the story of Vincent van Gogh fades into the quiet of the night, a life of color, chaos, and unshakable beauty. He left the world far too soon, yet his vision never dimmed. Through his swirling skies and golden fields, he still whispers to us that even in loneliness there can be light. Even in sorrow there can be wonder. Sleep well, and may your dreams be painted in shades of Van Gogh's stars.